There's gotta be a pun about the Bush family name, but this is a family show, so we'll just bypass that. Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Motley Stew Show, where we try to go through the biggest political stories and news stories of the week, see if we can dig underneath the surface and get out of the echo chamber and really find out what's really going on. Who are we really talking about, and why should we care? The main goal is always to see if we can get people more interested, more energized, more active in politics and news, because really an active community, an active citizenry is the best way to have an active and useful government. So in this series of getting to know the candidates, I usually try to do a video about the most recent candidate. But in this case, the most recent candidate is actually Donald Trump. Now, I'm not going to do a video about him yet because I still don't actually believe he's putting on a serious run. He's got about 30 days to turn in some very important paperwork, and if he does, then yes, we will do a video talking about his run, his positions, and some of the things he's said in the past. But right now, he's still kind of a joke, at least in my mind. I'm still not sure this isn't just a publicity stunt. But the day before Trump took his grand entrance in his own hotel, it was actually the time of Jeb Bush. He's the only other worst-kept secret in the 2016 campaign other than Hillary Clinton. Now, Jeb was the former ghost frontrunner of the campaign before he ever even announced, but now that he has announced, magically he's not exactly the frontrunner anymore. The pack is filled up far more than they anticipated, standing now at an even dozen. So as this year flows into the next, we will definitely be separating the wheat from the chaff and seeing who really lasts for the long haul. But before we go too far ahead, let's get a little background into Jeb Bush. Now, as you might already know, his dad is George W. Bush, who was the 41st president of the US, and his brother is George H. W. Bush, who was the 43rd president of the US. He also met his wife, Columba, when he was on a high school exchange trip to Mexico. He ran for governor of Florida in 1994 and lost that race, which we will be talking about in the future of this episode. After that, he ran twice more, winning both of them. Now, how does Jeb fit into the current dozen people trying to run for the nomination in the GOP? He's laying himself out really as the establishment moderate of the party, and he definitely is trying to separate himself from what he considers to be the fringe. He does really want to grab hold and keep some of that conservative cred, but I don't think he really worries about losing too much as it goes into the general election. He's been quoted as saying he is willing to lose the primary to win the general. This means he is not going to try to win every single state in the primary. He is willing to lose the ones that are very, very conservative, as long as he wins the other ones that are more center-right. He is looking at the long game, and he looks at the delegate count. All he needs is to get that magic number. And really, he thinks that any of those states that he does lose, his massive bank account and his Super-PAC money will help pull him through. And speaking of that Super-PAC, since January, it has raised over $100 million, far more than any candidate in the race. This was originally supposed to be designed as a shock and awe mentality, keeping pretty much any other candidate away from joining the race. But so many got in before he announced, it really didn't end up working. But that doesn't matter too much because he still has the money, and it will come in very handy as the primary season goes on. He also just released his logo for the campaign, which a lot of people are giving him a headache about, but many people are criticizing his logo for something that isn't exactly true. They're saying he left his last name, Bush, off the sign because he doesn't want to be connected to his father or his brother, especially considering his brother's recent presidency, which didn't exactly leave a good taste in the community's mouth. But in truth, this design is almost identical to the sign that he used when he was running for governor in Florida. It really is exactly the same. Maybe he left his family name off those two for somewhat similar reasons, but it can't be connected directly to his brother's recent presidency because it hadn't happened yet. So now let's take a look at some of the issues and some of the stances that he's taken on those. Now, education is something that he is going to use as a pillar of his campaign, saying he did huge educational reforms in Florida and turned that state around. But later on, we'll get into some other stories that might make that seem not so rosy of a picture. But something else that is going to hurt him in the Republican primary is that he still stands behind Common Core, something that most of the Republicans and the conservatives hate with a passion. His response to those criticizing Common Core is basically that they should come up with solutions instead of just complaining all the time. Now, on abortion, he basically follows along with the Hyde Amendment. He is against all abortion except in cases of rape, incest, or life of the mother, and he opposes all public funding of abortions. Obamacare, really, is this a surprise? Yes, he's against it. He wants it thrown out. What a shock. Now, same-sex marriage, he hasn't exactly changed on. He's been against it from the beginning, and for a long time was against any protections for the LGBTQ community. But now he says that we should respect the court's decisions and that we should give those people being affected by it the same respect. My personal belief is he knows a losing battle when he sees one. Now, going back to that educational record that he wants to stand on, let me bring up another little point for him. Back in 1999, he worked with someone and launched a charter school in Florida. Then in 2001, he helped institute rules that gave all charter schools grades. And when his own school got graded, it got a D. By 2008, that school had only gone up to a C- and it was $1 million in debt. That very same year, the state closed it. He has to know that things like that are going to come up during the primary. Now, another thing that he's got going for him that he is going to lean heavily on is his planned for support from the Latin American community. He has a very long and rich history with that community in Miami and in southern Florida. And he has a direct relation to that community through his wife and his biracial children, who are all bilingual, and he also speaks fluent Spanish himself, which he has used throughout his pre-campaign, filming 2 ads in Spanish only. But for all the importance that he gives the Latin American voting bloc and how much he says he will support that community, many of the positions that he takes right now are currently against the popular polling questions from that very community. Here's a few of those. In regards to the minimum wage, 78% of Latinos nationally and 80% of those in Florida think it should be raised to at least $10.10. Jeb Bush, on the other hand, says no, the federal government shouldn't even be involved in it, should be left to the states, and furthermore, shouldn't even be in the states' government, should be left to the private companies. 84% of Latinos nationwide think that climate change is a problem and the federal government should jump in and reduce carbon emissions. At one point, Jeb has been taking the ignorant talking point of just saying, I'm not a scientist, so I don't know. And he's also been quoted as saying, those who think the science is settled on climate change are being arrogant. Again, 97% of climate scientists agree that it's a problem. Seems kind of settled. 89% of Latinos nationwide support Obama on the executive actions that he took, which deferred deportation on undocumented immigrants. Jeb Bush has vowed to repeal those very actions. 77% of Latinos support the expansion of Medicaid and Obamacare. We've already said what Jeb thinks of that. And 87% of Latinos want to see taxes raised on the rich and on the corporations. And while in office, Bush slashed those very things. So all told, on many of the important policy positions, he's going head-to-head with what the Latino community really wants. But it is possible he's not looking to get the whole or even the majority of the Latino community. He just needs a larger piece of it than the Republicans have historically gotten. And that might be enough to put him over the edge in a contest that we always know is only about 10% difference. Then, in any presidential run, the immediate thing that happens is the skeletons come out of the closet. People go digging into it. And this isn't only going to come from the Democrats, it's going to come from the GOP too, and it's probably going to be even more vigorous from them. So let me just bring up a couple of things that they might point out. In 1994, during that first failed run for governor of Florida, he said that women on welfare should be able to get their life together and find a husband. That's catchy. I think I could get that on a greeting card. Now, in a book in 1995, he wrote this when he was talking about pregnancies coming from unwed couples. There was a time when neighbors and communities would frown on out-of-wedlock births, and when public condemnation was enough of a stimulus for one to be careful. Now, it's not a great statement and definitely not something he would want to talk about now, but it is going to be used as an attack point against him, probably unfairly, saying that he's talking specifically only about shaming the women. But in full context, he's talking about shaming the women and the men involved in those couples. And personally, here's my favorite. Back in 1994, in that failed campaign again, he was running against current incumbent governor Lawton Chiles, who is a Democrat. Now, during that run, about a week before the first debate, his campaign released an ad pointing out that there was a man on death row who had murdered a 10-year-old girl. That 10-year-old girl happened to be the daughter of a Bush campaign volunteer. The ad went on to say that unless you elected Bush governor of the state, you would never see the killer actually put to death because Governor Lawton Chiles was too liberal, too soft on crime. Every paper in the state went on to look into that ad and rendered it a complete lie, or at the very best, very misleading. The truth is that that killer had actually filed an appeal on his death sentence, and that was still in the works. There's absolutely nothing that Governor Chiles could have done to speed that process up. He had no power in that manner, and Jeb Bush knew it. His campaign knew it. They knew that that lie was a complete fabrication of the facts. Now, during that first debate, that was the very first question asked to him, and not only did he not exactly back down from it, he said that he would have run that ad longer. It only was on for about a week, maybe 9 days. In Governor Chiles' response, he went after Bush hardcore, and got a huge applause from the audience for it. And he pointed out that at that time, the current worst political ad in history belonged to an ad from the campaign of his own father, the infamous Willie Horton ad. And now he was saying that Jeb Bush had taken the crown for worst lie in political advertising. And just to keep up the family tradition, let's not forget that George W. Bush, in the 2004 run for the office against John Kerry, also put out the Swift Boat Veterans Against Kerry ad, another complete fabrication. So these kind of lies on television are kind of a family tradition. And just to put a cap on what happened to Jeb Bush in that '94 campaign, before running that ad, he was actually set to win the governor's office by 10 points. When the actual election was done, he lost by 2. Many people point to that ad as being the changing point. Now, I'm sure there will be more things that come up, both good and bad about him, as there will about every candidate going into the race. And I would never say that there are other candidates that have clean clauses. None of them do. But really, it seems that the more we look into the Bush family, they're worse than even the rumors about the Kennedys. And before we finish up, I wanted to leave you with this little tidbit of information. Because of the fact that many people are pointing out that this would be a dynasty. This would be a father, a brother, and another brother all being president of the United States. So really, what is the history of people sitting in the big chair in the Oval Office being related to previous people in the Oval Office? And here it is. So as we know, George H.W. Bush was the 41st president, and he's father of George W. Bush, the 43rd president. But also, John Adams, the 2nd president, was the father of John Quincy Adams, the 6th president. William Henry Harrison, the 9th president, was grandfather to Benjamin Harrison, the 23rd president. Now, stretching this out even a little farther, James Madison, the 4th president, is actually second cousin to Zachary Taylor, the 12th president, and Theodore Roosevelt, the 26th president, is 5th cousin to Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the 32nd president. And if they chase the genealogy of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, they find that he's related to 10 more presidents, 4 of them by blood, 6 by marriage. So really, a dynasty isn't really that different. So there you have it. There's some information about Jeb Bush, and maybe you might want to look into him more. As I said, he's definitely going to be trying to run as the grown-up on the stage. The closest person next to him who come to that kind of reputation is maybe Scott Walker, but he's not even officially announced yet. And of course, this leads us to the question, what do you think of Jeb Bush? Do you immediately hate him because of his last name and the dynasty, or do you think he can stand on his own merits and his own failures? And do you think it's really going to come down again to just Bush versus Clinton? And if it does, what are you going to do? Leave a comment down below and let me know. So thanks again for watching another episode of the Motley Stew Show. If you haven't already subscribed yet, you can do it right now. It also helps out the show, and it's a really great way to let me know that you're there. You can also like, favorite, and share this video anywhere, anytime, and with anyone who wants to join in the discussion. Stay tuned for next week, and as always, here's a little bit of Logan.
Get it. Get it with your hands, Logie.
Speaking of that Super-PAC, Jeb's taking a little bit of the ignorant, his response to those people criticizing it, saying that basically if they want to take, I'm going to do that again because I think I was going to burp the whole way through that.